The closing arguments had been devastating. Chloe Richardson stood in the conference room as her opponent's face flushed red, watching the jury absorb the final points of evidence she'd meticulously arranged across 3 weeks of testimony. The look in their eyes said everything. They believed her client. The executives didn't expect that outcome. By the time she left Richardson and Associates that evening, the promotion was verbal. Not official yet, but spoken. Her partner Maria had pulled her aside, smiled with genuine pride, and said, "You're going to be partner by next year." That was the cleanest execution I've ever seen. Chloe had nodded, collecting her coat, already thinking about the case files on her desk that needed attention. She didn't check her personal phone until she was in her car. The first text had come through at 6:47 p.m., then another at 7:15, then 4 more in rapid succession between 8:30 and 9 mo. All from different numbers. That was the pattern now. Derek would cycle through burner phones when she blocked each one, cycling through them like he was playing some kind of game where persistence was the only rule that mattered. The most recent one read, "I saw what you did today. You humiliated someone just like you're humiliating me." Chloe deleted it without responding. That was her protocol now. The lawyer who handled family law matters at her firm had been explicit about this. Don't engage. Don't explain. Don't provide material he could misinterpret as rekindling interest. Just delete and document. She'd been documenting for 4 weeks now, screenshotting everything, sending files to the Chicago Police Department's non-emergency line with methodical precision. The restraining order had been filed 2 weeks ago. Derek had violated it within 3 days. A text from a new number claiming he just wanted to talk about their future. Another violation when he appeared at her office building's lobby. The security guard had recognized him from the photograph she'd circulated and asked him to leave. Chloe had called it in immediately. The police report was filed. Thomas Wells, the lawyer her firm recommended for situations like this, had assured her the documentation would matter if it escalated further. She didn't want to think about it escalating further. The drive to her new apartment took 20 minutes. She'd moved deliberately to the opposite side of the city, a smaller place in a less expensive neighborhood. It wasn't a luxury building. It wasn't even particularly nice, but it was somewhere Derek didn't know about. Or hadn't known about. The investigator he'd hired apparently moved faster than she'd anticipated. She parked in the underground garage at 11:04 p.m. and took the internal stairs. The building was quiet. An older man nodded to her as she passed his door on the 3rd-floor landing. She'd never spoken to him before, but she acknowledged the gesture anyway, the courtesy of urban anonymity. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. 3B. 2 bedrooms that she only used one of. 1 bathroom. A kitchen barely large enough for 2 people to stand in. She'd left the heat on that morning to combat the October chill bleeding through the old windows. When she opened her door, she immediately felt it. The air was warmer than it should have been. The apartment wasn't empty. Derek sat in her armchair, the one she'd borrowed from her mother 2 months ago, and never returned. He was positioned perpendicular to the window, his silhouette framed against the ambient light filtering through her curtains from the street below. He didn't move when she entered, didn't speak, just observed her with the kind of stillness that made her understand, immediately and with absolute clarity, that something fundamental had changed. He wasn't just texting anymore. He wasn't just appearing in public spaces. He was inside her home, inside her sanctuary. The silence lasted 5 seconds. "We need to talk about what you did today," Derek said. His voice was low. That was what terrified her most about him, she realized in that moment. The low voice, the controlled tone. It was the vocal equivalent of a threat made through a smile. Chloe didn't respond. Her lawyer's voice was suddenly very loud in her head. "Don't engage. Don't explain. Escape if possible." She remained standing in the doorway, hand still on the frame, calculating distances and outcomes. Derek stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, not aggressive in the immediate sense, just possessive, like he was rising to greet someone he owned. "You've been making very poor decisions lately, Chloe. Decisions that hurt people who care about you. Decisions that make it hard for me to understand what's happened to the woman I was going to marry." He stepped forward. Every instinct crystallized into one singular imperative. Run. She didn't think. didn't formulate plans, just moved backward out of the doorway and toward the stairs. Her body knew things her conscious mind wasn't processing. She descended the internal stairwell in a way that was almost a fall, her hand sliding down the railing because her feet weren't coordinating properly with the descent. She heard her own breathing in a way that seemed separate from her body. By the time she pushed through the lobby door, she was moving at something that approximated a sprint. Her keys were in her pocket, but not her coat. Not her bag. Not anything except the clothes on her body and the phone in her hand. The October night was already cold. By the time she'd run 3 blocks, the temperature had dropped further. There was something in the air that smelled like precipitation. She ran without direction, without purpose. Just the primal understanding that north meant away, so she kept moving north. Her professional shoes, chosen for courtroom appearances, were inadequate for sustained running on sidewalks. The soles provided no traction. Her dress pants, purchased for appearances, didn't allow her legs to move with full extension. Her perception of the city became fragmented. She knew Chicago, but panic had rewritten her mental map. Streets that should have been familiar became foreign. Blocks that should have oriented her turned into labyrinths. Somewhere around the 4th block, she became aware of a car pulling alongside her trajectory. Her mind processed Derek and his Audi, and the thought generated such a spike of adrenaline that she changed direction abruptly, moving into an alley she barely registered. There was a fence at the end. She could possibly climb it. Should she climb it? The car sound faded. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe the panic was fabricating threats that didn't exist yet. A different vehicle approached from the opposite direction as she emerged from the alley onto a parallel street. This one slowed. This one stopped. The passenger window descended to reveal a man's face. She couldn't see details. Just silhouette. Just the basic architecture of male features backlit by dashboard illumination. She almost attacked him. Some part of her mind recognized this before her body engaged in violence. The man's voice cut through the fog. "You're going to give yourself a coronary running like that." The accent was Italian, or close to it. Not Derek. Definitely not Derek. She recognized that much. The voice was lower. Older, maybe. Controlled in a way that Derek's voice could never achieve because Derek's control was performative. This control was fundamental. "Get in the car," Franco Grimaldi said. "You're shaking like you've seen a ghost." She almost refused. Every neural pathway her brain had built over the past 4 weeks screamed not to trust anyone, not to enter vehicles, not to accept proximity from men she didn't know. But the alternative was continuing to run, and her legs were beginning to register the demand she'd placed on them. The cold had moved from abstract environmental factor to physical penetration. Her breath was becoming difficult to regulate. She entered the car. Franco didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just drove. The restaurant appeared about 15 minutes later. Stellaare. She'd never been there before. She'd heard about it through professional circles, but it wasn't a place where associates like her went. It was too expensive. Too exclusive. The kind of establishment where the waiters knew the clientele by name and the prices weren't printed on menus you were given. He guided her through the service entrance, past a kitchen where people were conducting cleaning protocols for the evening, past storage areas that smelled like wine and garlic and history, to a room at the back, small, sparse. A bed, a sink, a window that looked into brick. "You can sleep here tonight," Franco said. "No one's going to find you. I have guards, I have cameras, I have people who notice things." He left before she could formulate a response. Chloe sat on the bed and began to understand, through the slowly receding adrenaline, that her life had just fundamentally changed course. Not improved, not worsened, just altered in a direction that she couldn't yet process. She slept eventually. Not well, not restfully. Just slept. While she did, Franco Grimaldi conducted research. The name Derek Collins meant something to people in certain circles. His father had been a decorated police officer. His mother had died when he was young. He'd grown up in a household where authority was language and isolation was treatment. By all accounts, Derek had inherited both. His professional record was clean. His personal record was not. Franco found evidence of 3 previous relationships that had ended similarly. Women who described Derek as controlling. Women who used words like obsessive and manipulative when recounting interactions with him after breakups. None of them had pursued legal action. That suggested fear, or insufficient resources, or both. Franco made a phone call at 2:47 a.m. His lawyer answered on the second ring because Franco's lawyers always answered when he called, regardless of the hour. "There's a situation," Franco said. "A woman staying with me tonight. Her ex has developed an interest in her that isn't reciprocated. His name is Derek Collins. I need you to understand the scope of his behavior and whether it creates complications for me." Thomas Wells listened. When Franco finished the summary, Wells said, "The restraining order suggests she's taking this seriously. The fact that he violated it suggests he's not taking it seriously enough to care about legal consequences. That's the dangerous kind of obsession. Can I make it worse by providing her sanctuary? Potentially. If her ex is already unstable, offering her protection might escalate his fixation. But it's better than leaving her unprotected." Wells paused. "What's your intention here? She's just someone who ran into the right car at the right moment, or is there something else?" Franco looked at the security camera feed showing Chloe sleeping in the back room. She was curled into herself, still trembling slightly even in unconsciousness. "Just someone who needed help," Franco said. "For now, that's all it is. By morning, that would become a complication neither of them anticipated." Waking in the back room of Stellaare felt like emerging from a dream someone else was having. The mattress beneath her was firmer than she expected, covered in sheets that smelled of industrial detergent and something older, fabric that had absorbed decades of its own stories. Chloe's body registered the time through the quality of light filtering through the single window. Morning. She'd slept through the night without waking, which was its own kind of victory. Her phone showed 7:43 a.m. She had 17 missed calls and 42 text messages, none of them from numbers she recognized. She deleted them without reading. The kitchen staff was already moving when she ventured into the main restaurant area. Lucia, the chef, noticed her immediately. The woman was perhaps 45, with the kind of face that suggested she'd made peace with life's disappointments decades ago and had moved on to other concerns. She wore her dark hair pulled back severely, revealing a scar along her left temple that she made no effort to conceal. When she smiled at Chloe, it reached her eyes. "You're the one Franco brought in last night," Lucia said. It wasn't a question. "Come. You look like someone who doesn't eat properly." Chloe followed her into the kitchen. The offer of food was simultaneously comforting and anxiety-inducing. Accepting meant acknowledging that she might stay. Lucia placed a plate in front of her containing pasta carbonara that looked like it came from someone's grandmother's hands rather than a commercial kitchen. The yolk of the egg had broken slightly into the sauce, creating golden tributaries through the cream. "Eat," Lucia commanded. "Hungry people make poor decisions." By mid-afternoon, Chloe had been absorbed into the rhythms of Stellaare. Marco, the restaurant's general manager, treated her with a formality that bordered on ritual. He brought her coffee at exactly 3 o'clock, prepared precisely as she'd made it for herself in her apartment. Double espresso. Warm milk. No sugar. The fact that he'd observed her preferences closely enough to replicate them without instruction suggested something about the information networks that existed within these walls. Nothing happened at Stellaare without multiple people noticing. Lucia pulled her into the kitchen again around 6. The evening service hadn't started yet, but the preparation was already underway. Fresh pasta lay in sheets across cloth-covered tables. Lucia began to teach her the technique for making traditional Napolitana sauce. The way garlic needed to be sliced thin enough to be almost transparent. How long the tomatoes could cook before the flavor began to deteriorate rather than concentrate. The precise moment when anchovies should be added, so they dissolved into the sauce, rather than remaining as distinct objects. "Most people think cooking is about the final product," Lucia said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "It's actually about understanding change. You're not creating food, you're controlling transformation. Nothing stays the way it begins." The observation seemed to apply to more than just sauce. By the end of the first week, Chloe had stopped checking the door every time it opened, though she remained hyper-aware of who entered. By the second week, she'd begun to recognize regulars. the businessman who ordered the same wine every Thursday, the couple who sat in the corner booth and spoke barely 3 words to each other during entire meals, the younger man in expensive suits who observed the room more than he ate his food. It was during the second week that Franco noticed her competence in ways that extended beyond survival instinct. He'd been reviewing contracts in his office when he called her in. The space was smaller than she'd imagined, functional rather than luxurious. A desk of dark wood, a chair that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent, walls lined with books in multiple languages. "Sit," Franco said. He placed a document in front of her. "This is a franchise agreement. Tell me what you see that concerns you." Chloe spent 4 hours reading. She made notes. She circled clauses. She wrote queries in the margins. By the time she finished, she'd identified a series of legal vulnerabilities that would have cost Franco approximately $47,000 in unfavorable terms within the first 5 years of the contract. She showed him her work. She explained her reasoning. She didn't apologize for finding problems. Franco listened. Then he accepted every single recommendation. After that, he began to involve her in other matters. Not operational decisions. Contracts. Regulatory interpretations. The internal legal architecture of a business that appeared legitimate on its surface. Chloe found herself moving through the restaurant and the rooms above it, beginning to understand how institutions functioned when their actual mechanisms were deliberately obscured from public view. One evening, while reviewing documentation for a property acquisition, Chloe asked him directly, "Are you trying to determine whether I'm reliable or whether I'm a threat?" Franco looked up from his own papers. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then something that resembled genuine amusement crossed his features. He laughed. Not a sound she'd heard from him before. It was brief, controlled, but unmistakably present. "I'm trying to determine whether you're intelligent enough to be around me," he said. "The answer is yes." On the 12th day, Derek appeared at the restaurant's entrance. Marco intercepted him before he could progress more than 3 steps past the host stand. The conversation wasn't violent, but it was decisive. Derek left. Not without leaving something behind, though. A note on the bar addressed to Chloe. Franco found it first and read it before deciding whether to show it to her. The message was brief. "You owe me an explanation." Franco called Thomas Wells that evening. "The situation is escalating," he said. "He's moved from communication to location surveillance. He knows where she is now. He'll likely try to leverage that knowledge," Wells responded. "Either through legal channels or through persistence. If she has representation..." "She doesn't," Franco said. "She needs it." During the 3rd week, a man began appearing in the restaurant with the regularity of someone conducting reconnaissance. He was forgettable in appearance, which was precisely the point. He ordered different wines. He ate different dishes. He observed. He never approached anyone. He never made notes. He simply existed in the space and cataloged whatever his presence allowed him to gather. Franco noticed him on the 2nd visit. Chloe noticed him on the 3rd. When she mentioned it to Franco, he confirmed what she already suspected. Esposito. He has people everywhere. Has for years. It's not personal. It's infrastructure. "Then I'm a problem for you," Chloe said. The statement was practical rather than emotional. "My presence here creates complications." Franco considered this. "Yes, but problems that exist are easier to manage than problems you don't know about." By the end of her 2nd week at Stellaare, Chloe had begun to process something she hadn't anticipated. The violence that surrounded this place. The careful surveillance. The coded conversations she overheard between Franco and his associates. The way security operated through seamless invisibility rather than obvious force. Didn't terrify her the way Derek's emotional manipulation had. Clarity, even when it involved danger, felt like a kind of honesty. She'd spent 3 years with a man whose control was disguised as affection. Franco's presence was what it was. No pretense, no gaslighting, no performance designed to make her question her own perception. Understanding that distinction changed something fundamental about how she moved through the days. 3 weeks into her unplanned residency at Stellaare, Chloe had learned to distinguish between types of silence. The silence of the restaurant during closing procedures was different from the silence of the back office during afternoon hours. The silence of Franco's presence was different from the silence of his absence. She could navigate these distinctions now the way other people navigated streets they'd lived on for years. The silence at 3:47 a.m. was unprecedented. She couldn't sleep again. Insomnia had become a familiar companion, the kind that visited her when her nervous system registered safety and no longer required hypervigilance to sustain itself. Paradoxically, the absence of threat had made rest impossible. Her body had spent 3 years in a state of managed alarm. Now it didn't know how to decompress. She moved through the darkened kitchen toward the front of the restaurant, thinking about making tea. That's when she heard the sound. Not loud. Not a crash or a shout. Just the subtle auditory signature of someone moving through space while trying not to be heard. She froze. Her legal training collided with her survival instinct. The rational part of her brain processed that Franco had guards. He had security protocols. Whatever was happening was either authorized, or she was about to discover how unprepared she was for the reality of living within the infrastructure of organized crime. The figure that emerged from the corridor was Franco. What registered first was the damage. His shirt, one of the custom-tailored ones she'd observed him wear during business meetings, was torn along the left side. Blood had saturated the fabric from sternum to waist. Not a delicate amount. Not something that could be dismissed as a minor injury. The wound underneath suggested that something had passed through his body at high velocity and emerged carrying pieces of him with it. Every professional composure Chloe had cultivated dissolved into primal panic. She made a sound, not a word, just an exhaled realization of what she was observing. Franco looked at her with an expression that contained no fear, no pain, just acknowledgement of her presence. "Don't scream," he said. The instruction was unnecessary. Screaming had ceased to be an option the moment her brain processed the gravity of the injury. "You're bleeding," she said. The observation was so inadequate that it bordered on absurd. He was bleeding in a way that suggested professional medical attention was not optional. "I know," Franco replied. He moved toward the kitchen sink with deliberate control. Each step suggesting significant pain was being managed through sheer force of will. He reached for a dish towel, pressing it against his wound. "I'll be fine. It's not as deep as it looks." Chloe's emergency medical training kicked in. She moved without conscious decision, her hands operating according to skills that had become instinct. She retrieved the first aid kit from the lower cabinet. She'd already explored the kitchen thoroughly enough to know where emergency supplies were stored. She grabbed clean cloth. She found antiseptic. She moved with purpose, and Franco allowed her to move him toward a kitchen stool, where he sat while she assessed the damage. The wound was severe but survivable. A projectile had passed through his shoulder, missing critical structures through what appeared to be either luck or the kind of tactical awareness that came from understanding ballistics at a level Chloe didn't possess. Blood was still flowing, but the rate had slowed. The body's natural clotting mechanisms were beginning to reassert themselves. She worked methodically. Water, antiseptic, pressure, clean bandaging. Her hands operated independently of her racing thoughts. Some part of her brain was processing what this meant. That Franco operated in a world where people shot at him, where wounds were occupational hazards rather than accidents. Another part of her was registering something more complicated. He was allowing her to tend to him. For someone like Franco, that admission of vulnerability was not casual. When she finished the bandaging, she didn't immediately step back. She remained standing in front of him, her hands still extended, uncertain what the protocol was for this situation. Franco reached out and took one of her hands. Not aggressively, not possessively, just held it against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat beneath the torn fabric. "You were worried I wouldn't be here tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Chloe acknowledged. There seemed no point in denial. Franco said nothing immediately. He held her hand against his chest, while his blood cooled on her skin. When he finally spoke, his accent seemed more pronounced, as though pain or proximity to death had loosened whatever editing mechanisms usually governed his speech. "I grew up in a place where this was normal," Franco began. "Naples. My father was in the Camorra. That was just what we were. My mother didn't ask him about his work. She didn't want to know. She trained me from childhood not to ask. There was just this understanding that some conversations couldn't happen because they would make certain things real. Chloe remained motionless, allowing him to continue. When I was 12, he took me to a business meeting. Not because he wanted to, because he wanted me to understand what I was inheriting. There was a man he was in dispute with. The dispute was resolved in front of me. Franco closed his eyes. I didn't see him pull a weapon. I didn't see the moment of decision. I just saw the consequences. And my father told me afterward that crying was weakness, and weakness was death. That's where I learned that vulnerability is the thing that kills you. The confession seemed to cost him something. The muscles along his jaw tightened. His breathing became more controlled, as though managing the physical response to psychological exposure. I'm telling you this, Franco continued, because you need to understand what kind of person you're living with. I'm not a good man. I'm a man who exists outside the usual architecture of ethics. Because the usual architecture doesn't apply to people like me. Chloe found her voice. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve honesty about what this is. What I am. She withdrew her hand from his chest, and instead took his face in both her hands. A gesture that felt simultaneously intimate and clinical. She made him look at her directly. I spent 3 years with a man who told me I was crazy, Chloe said quietly, who convinced me that my perceptions were unreliable, who made me question whether I deserved better treatment because I wasn't good enough at maintaining his happiness. You're telling me you're dangerous. You're telling me you operate outside normal ethics. At least you're being honest about it. At least you're not pretending that your violence is love. The weight of that comparison seemed to register. Franco's expression shifted in a way she couldn't quite categorize. Not relief, not absolution, just some recognition of parallel damage. The conversation continued through the remainder of the night. Franco spoke about the isolation of his position, about the way that power created distance from authenticity, about the fact that he'd never allowed anyone close enough to witness vulnerability, because vulnerability was liability. Chloe spoke about Derek in a way she hadn't articulated before. Not just the specific incidents of control, but the infrastructure of psychological manipulation, the constant undermining of her confidence, the way he'd systematized doubt into her every decision. I have a mother, Chloe said around 4:30 a.m. She's in a residential care facility. She has early-stage dementia. I promised I'd visit her last week and I haven't been because... She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Because you've been here, Franco finished. Because I've been afraid to leave. Because I'm not sure if that's rational or if I'm just making another bad decision. Franco stood carefully, testing his shoulder. Pain registered but seemed manageable. Come with me tomorrow. We'll visit your mother. The offer seemed to contain more significance than its surface meaning suggested. He was offering her permission to leave. He was offering to accompany her. He was offering recognition that her connections outside of Stellaare mattered. They visited her mother at a facility on the north side of the city. Margaret Richardson was 73 and increasingly present in the past. She recognized her daughter, but couldn't quite place the timeline. She knew she'd had a daughter named Chloe, but seemed surprised to discover that this woman standing before her was that daughter, now fully grown and capable of adult decisions. Franco waited in the common area while Chloe sat with her mother. When they returned to him, Margaret was holding Chloe's hand with the grip of someone who just remembered something important. You look happy, Margaret said to her daughter. You haven't looked happy in a long time. The observation followed them back to the car. Franco didn't comment on it directly, but something in his posture changed. Some internal tension seemed to release. On the drive back to Stellaare, he reached across and placed his hand on Chloe's knee. Not moving it. Not escalating the contact. Just establishing that he was there, that her proximity to him was significant enough to warrant physical acknowledgement. I need you to understand something, Chloe said as they pulled into the restaurant's parking area. Whatever this is becoming, I'm not choosing it because I'm traumatized and vulnerable. I'm choosing it because for the first time in years, someone is being honest with me about exactly what they are, and I'm not being asked to reshape myself to accommodate their preferred version of reality. Franco turned to face her fully. That's all I can offer, he said. Honesty about what I am. Then that's enough to begin with. The mandated welfare check arrived on a Thursday evening. precise as scheduling and bureaucracy allowed. 2 officers in uniform, one carrying a clipboard, the other maintaining the neutral expression of someone performing routine administrative tasks. They appeared during service hours when Stellaare was occupied with the dinner crowd, which was either calculated on Derek's part or fortunate timing that worked to his advantage regardless. Chloe was in the back office reviewing supplier contracts when Marco informed her. Her stomach registered the information before her conscious mind fully processed it. Derek had escalated from personal contact to institutional leverage. He'd petitioned authorities, filed paperwork, created documentation that positioned her disappearance as potential criminal activity rather than voluntary relocation. Franco was in the main dining area when the officers entered. He observed their arrival through the architectural awareness of someone who'd spent years understanding how institutions moved through space. Marco approached him first, murmuring information that caused no visible reaction. Franco simply nodded and gestured toward the kitchen, indicating the officers should be directed there. Chloe emerged from the back office to find 2 uniformed representatives of the Chicago Police Department standing in her employer's restaurant. The first officer, a woman perhaps 50 years old with the posture of someone who'd seen enough human deception to maintain perpetual skepticism, extended her identification. "We're here for a welfare check. Are you Chloe Richardson?" The question wasn't hostile. It was procedural. That somehow made it worse. Procedure implied that Derek had successfully navigated institutional channels, that he'd created a narrative compelling enough to warrant official investigation. "I am," Chloe confirmed. She didn't offer additional information. Her legal training remained functional despite the spike of adrenaline. "Your emergency contact reported that he hasn't been able to reach you for several weeks and expressed concern about your well-being. We're conducting a routine verification that you're here of your own volition and not being retained against your wishes." The specific phrasing was interesting. Derek had used language that suggested captivity, that framed Franco's sanctuary as something approaching imprisonment. Chloe understood immediately what narrative had been constructed. She was a vulnerable woman. Franco was a criminal element. The intersection was naturally suspicious. "I'm here voluntarily," Chloe stated. Her voice remained controlled, modulated to project competence rather than defensiveness. "I left my previous residence because my former partner was violating a restraining order I had filed against him. I sought shelter at this establishment, and it was provided." The second officer, younger, with the expression of someone still developing capacity for reading human complexity, looked between Chloe and Franco with poorly disguised suspicion. Franco stood motionless, observing but not intervening. His restraint was strategic. Any defensive response would validate whatever narrative Derek had constructed. "The individual who contacted us expressed concern that you might be experiencing coercion," the female officer continued. She consulted her clipboard, reading directly. "He indicated that you've been isolated from your previous social connections and placed in a dependent situation with an individual of questionable reputation." Chloe processed the accusation. Derek had been strategic. He'd taken observations that were technically accurate and reframed them through a lens designed to create suspicion. Yes, she'd been separated from previous connections. Yes, she was in an unfamiliar situation. Yes, Franco's reputation was questionable, but the interpretation attached to those facts was dishonest. "My former partner is Derek Collins," Chloe said, providing information without being asked. "He violated a court-ordered restraining order by accessing my apartment without permission 3 weeks ago. That forced me to leave my residence. I documented this incident. I filed a police report. That documentation exists on file." She paused, allowing the officers to process the correction to Derek's narrative. "The individual providing me shelter has offered no coercion. I remain in contact with my employer, my family, and my legal advisors. I am here because I chose to be here after the alternatives proved unsafe." The female officer exchanged a glance with her colleague. The dynamic shifted slightly. Derek's narrative, presented as concern for her welfare, was beginning to appear as something else entirely: persistence, pursuit. Documentation was now being recognized as relevant. "Do you have documentation of this restraining order?" the officer asked. "Yes. My attorney can provide copies. Thomas Wells. His office is in the loop." Chloe provided contact information, understanding that verification would follow. I can also provide documentation of my ex-partner's violations. The welfare check concluded differently than Derek had anticipated. The officers took her statement, confirmed that she appeared capable of rational decision-making, and noted for their report that she was neither imprisoned nor coerced. They did, however, express interest in speaking with Derek Collins regarding allegations of violating a restraining order. The departure of the police from Stellaare was quiet, but final. The narrative Derek had constructed had been dismantled through Chloe's direct confrontation with factual information. What happened after the officers left mattered more than the welfare check itself. Chloe called Diane Foster, the attorney she'd begun corresponding with during her time at Stellaare. Diane had built a career on representing women navigating the legal system while attempting to escape domestic situations. She listened to Chloe's account, documented the timeline of violations, and asked specific questions about evidence preservation. This is the third violation if we count the initial apartment intrusion, the appearance at the restaurant, and now the filing of a false welfare check, Diane said over the phone. Chloe was in Franco's office, speaking quietly, but without attempting to hide the conversation. We have the original restraining order. We have police reports. We have this evening's official welfare check documentation. That's substantial if we're methodical. What's the strategy? Chloe asked. We document everything prospectively, Diane responded. We don't depend on police to recognize a pattern. We create the pattern ourselves. Every contact, every communication, every attempt to access you. We build a case so comprehensive that Derek's next violation becomes his last, because he'll face federal stalking charges, not just local restraining order violations. 3 days after the welfare check, Derek appeared at Chloe's workplace. Not Stellaare, her actual law office at Richardson & Associates. He waited in the lobby. Security recognized him from the photograph Chloe had circulated. They asked him to leave. He initially resisted. By the time the police arrived, he'd created his third documented violation in less than 2 weeks. The arrest was anticlimactic. Police arrived and transported him. Charges were filed. His father, the retired police chief, apparently no longer possessed sufficient influence to prevent prosecution for something this thoroughly documented. The coverage appeared in local legal media. Attorney Derek Collins, accused of stalking his former partner. The optics were catastrophic for his professional reputation. Chloe watched the news coverage from Stellaare's back office. Franco stood beside her, but didn't touch her. He allowed the moment to exist without his intervention. This resolves itself, Franco said quietly. Derek becomes a cautionary tale about persistence without acceptance. But he's still breathing, Chloe replied. The observation wasn't personal. It was acknowledgement of something Franco had previously offered. You could have resolved this permanently. Yes, Franco agreed. But this way, it's resolved legally. It's resolved in a way that doesn't require me to manage the consequences. That's more sustainable for both of us. Chloe understood what he was communicating. She'd triumphed through her own agency, not through his intervention. That distinction mattered more than any physical outcome could have. She had reclaimed the ability to affect her own situation, rather than remaining dependent on someone else's capacity for violence. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythms. Lucia continued teaching Chloe culinary. Marco continued bringing her coffee prepared exactly as she preferred. Franco continued to exist in proximity to her, without demanding anything except honesty about what they were becoming together. 1 week after Derek's arrest, Thomas Wells called Franco's personal line. The conversation lasted approximately 90 seconds. When Franco ended the call, his expression had shifted into something harder, more calculated. He'd received information that fundamentally altered the trajectory they'd been on, and Chloe recognized immediately that whatever had been communicated had consequences. She found him in the office at 11:47 p.m., long after service had concluded. The restaurant below was in that liminal state between operating and closed, staff performing final cleaning protocols while the building gradually transitioned from public to private space. Franco stood at the window overlooking the street, his hand resting against the glass. Esposito was planning something, Franco said without preamble. Before Derek was arrested, before the welfare check, before this entire situation solidified into something everyone could see. Chloe waited. She'd learned that Franco spoke in layers, that understanding required allowing him to develop information rather than interrupting with questions. He wanted you, Franco continued. Not for anything specific, just as leverage. The plan was sequestration. Take you. Force negotiation. Create a situation where I had to choose between territorial concession and your safety. The statement hung between them like exposure. 3 days was the planned timeline. 3 days after Derek was arrested, Esposito's people were positioned to execute retrieval. The investigation had been ongoing for weeks, but confirmation only arrived after the immediate threat had passed. Information architecture, Thomas had explained, sometimes revealed threats only after they became irrelevant. Chloe processed the information through layers of implication. You knew, she said. It wasn't accusation. It was recognition of a specific type of deception. I suspected. I had investigators confirming. I didn't know the timeline with certainty until after it had already passed. And you didn't tell me. Franco turned from the window to face her directly. You were managing Derek. You didn't need additional threat scenarios complicating the situation. The response was exactly what Chloe had expected, and that expected quality of deception somehow made it worse. Franco had made decisions about her safety, without including her in those decisions. He had operated from the presumption that knowledge would be destabilizing rather than clarifying. He had, in essence, done to her the same thing Derek had done, just in reverse. Derek had controlled through false reassurance. Franco was controlling through selective information management. Don't do that, Chloe said. Her voice remained controlled, but something fundamental in her tone had changed. Don't make decisions about my life and then justify them afterward by claiming you were protecting me. That's not what this is. It's exactly what it is. You decided what I could handle. You decided what I needed to know. You constructed a narrative about my well-being that conveniently positioned you as the decision-maker. That's not protection. That's management. The accusation was fair, and Franco recognized it. He didn't attempt immediate justification. Instead, he acknowledged the hit. You're right. I didn't leave one controlling relationship to enter another. Even if the control looks different, even if it's justified by different reasoning. Franco moved toward her, but she stepped backward. The gesture created physical distance that represented something larger. Chloe, I need space, she said. I need to think about what this actually is. I need to determine whether I'm here because I chose this, or because I've become dependent on the sanctuary you provided. What are you saying? I'm saying I need to return to my own life, my career, my apartment, my autonomy. I'm saying I need to understand whether we're actually compatible, or whether I've just transferred dependency from one man to another. Franco absorbed the statement. His expression suggested that he understood the logic of her position, and recognized that argument would be counterproductive. Okay. You're right. You need to rebuild independence. You need to verify that your choices are actually your choices and not reactions to trauma. Franco moved to his desk and retrieved a business card. When you've decided what you want, contact Diane Foster. Tell her I authorized you to consult my legal team regarding employment. Chloe took the card. You're offering me work? I'm offering you a structure that maintains legitimate connection between us while you recalibrate. Franco returned to the window. I'm not Derek. I'm not going to threaten abandonment if you leave. I'm not going to attempt emotional manipulation to keep you here. If you need to go, go. If you decide this is something worth building, I'll be here. She left Stellaare the following morning. Not dramatically. Not with finality. Just collected her belongings from the back room and departed toward a conventional existence. Franco didn't attempt to stop her. Marco didn't offer transportation. Lucia didn't provide provisions. The restaurant simply released her the way it had absorbed her, without fanfare or resistance. Returning to her apartment was simultaneously comforting and disorienting. The space had remained exactly as she'd left it 6 weeks prior. Derek's investigators had apparently not maintained surveillance after his arrest. The environment felt frozen in the moment she'd escaped from it. She spent the first evening simply existing in the space, reacquainting herself with the geography of independent living. Work resumed the following Monday. Richardson and Associates welcomed her return with a combination of professional relief and barely concealed curiosity. Maria, her partner, didn't ask directly where she'd been, but the invitation to discuss her absence hung in every conversation. Chloe provided minimal information. Family matter. Resolved. Ready to continue. The standard professional deflection that prevented unnecessary elaboration. 3 days into her return to the office, Diane Foster appeared in her lunch hour. They met at a cafe neutral enough to be impersonal. Diane brought with her the documentation of Derek's violations. The case was proceeding. Charges would move forward. The prosecutor's office had determined sufficient evidence existed to proceed with criminal stalking prosecution. Your ex-partner's behavior established a pattern, Diane explained, sliding documents across the table. Initial contact attempts. Escalation to physical proximity, the apartment intrusion, multiple violations of the restraining order, the false welfare check. Each incident independently might be dismissed as isolated. Collectively, they constitute systematic harassment. What's the timeline? Court date in January. He'll likely take a plea rather than proceed to trial. The evidence is comprehensive enough that conviction would be nearly assured. Chloe studied the documentation. Her own legal training allowed her to follow the architecture of the case. It was solid. Derek's behavior, documented through police reports and official channels, created a narrative that legal system could recognize and process. Derek would face consequences not because someone loved Chloe enough to eliminate him, but because she had navigated institutional systems with precision and documentation. That distinction felt important. By the 4th week of her return to independent existence, the acute discomfort of separation had begun to transition into something more sustainable. She'd successfully re-established her professional identity. She'd begun corresponding with law school colleague regarding partnership opportunities in a firm focused on domestic law specialization. She'd visited her mother twice, and the relationship had begun a subtle recalibration towards something healthier. But she also called Diane with a question that had been developing for weeks. If I wanted to consult for someone regarding legitimate business operations, Chloe began carefully, how would that be structured to maintain professional distance? Diane understood immediately what was being asked. You mean Franco Grimaldi? I mean consulting work that maintains standard legal client confidentiality and professional boundaries. Work that allows separation between personal and professional relationships while still maintaining connection. It would be structured identically to consulting with any other client. Retainer agreement, scope of services, clear delineation of responsibilities, standard legal framework. Would it be problematic given my previous relationship to the client? Diane considered this. Professionally? No. Ethically? Only if the terms aren't transparent. As long as you're clear about the nature of the relationship and maintain professional standards, it's functional. 2 weeks later, Chloe contacted Franco for the first time since leaving Stellaare. The communication was formal, professional. She proposed a consulting arrangement regarding legal infrastructure for his legitimate restaurant operations. Scope of work, retainer structure, clear limitations. Franco responded through Thomas Wells with acceptance of her terms. The professional relationship was established before any personal relationship could resume. They were no longer simply two damaged people finding refuge in proximity. They were a client and a consultant who recognized that professional frameworks could contain whatever personal elements might develop between them. Their first formal meeting occurred in Franco's office. He sat behind his desk. She sat across from it. They reviewed documentation regarding supplier agreements and regulatory compliance. The professional distance felt artificial at first, then gradually became the architecture that allowed them to interact without the complications of power imbalance. Thank you, Franco said when the meeting concluded. They remained seated in their respective positions, maintaining the formal structure. For giving this a chance, for being willing to rebuild this differently. Chloe recognized that he was acknowledging more than just professional consultation. I needed to understand whether I was capable of making independent decisions. I needed to verify that my choices were actually mine. And are they? I'm choosing to be here, Chloe responded. That's different from being dependent on being here. It's different from being unable to leave. I'm making this choice consciously, and that changes what it is. Franco nodded, accepting the distinction. The consulting relationship would become the framework through which they rebuilt whatever was developing between them. Professional boundary, personal connection, both operating simultaneously, each validating the other's authenticity. 3 months into her return to Richardson and Associates, Chloe had successfully archived the version of herself that had existed before Derek and before Stellaare. Not erased. Archived. The distinction mattered. Those experiences had restructured her understanding of agency, of vulnerability, of what commitment could mean when both parties operated from honesty rather than manipulation. The promotion came quietly, announced during a Friday afternoon meeting with Maria and the third partner, Thomas Richardson. Not the same Thomas Wells who worked with Franco, though the coincidence of names had created its own internal humor. The offer was solid. Partnership track within 18 months. Significant salary increase. Autonomy over case selection within the domestic law specialization she'd begun developing. "You understand what this represents," Maria said when the meeting concluded. "You're no longer just competent. You're proving you can rebuild after significant disruption. That's a different quality entirely." Chloe understood. Competence was technical. Resilience was character. Her consulting work for Franco remained structurally separate from her primary practice, yet increasingly woven through her professional identity. Every Monday and Thursday afternoon, she conducted legal review of Stellaare's operational documents, contract analysis, regulatory compliance, the architecture of legitimacy that Franco was gradually solidifying around his restaurant operations. The work itself was unremarkable, standard legal consulting, but the framework it provided allowed them to maintain proximity without the complications that had emerged during her full-time residency. Diane Foster had begun appearing at Stellaare with increasing frequency, not as Franco's associate, but as Chloe's colleague. They'd expanded their professional relationship into formal partnership regarding cases of women navigating domestic law issues. Diane brought resources and strategic thinking. Chloe brought Franco's resources, carefully cordoned from the cases themselves, but available when institutional barriers required creative solutions. "Your boyfriend is useful," Diane observed during a Thursday afternoon consultation at the restaurant. They were reviewing a case file regarding a woman seeking custody while escaping an abusive marriage. "He's not my boyfriend," Chloe corrected, though the correction felt increasingly incomplete. "Whatever institutional configuration you've created, it's effective." Diane set the case file down. "That woman's husband has significant financial resources and questionable ethics. Franco's institutional knowledge regarding asset concealment will help us identify where he's hiding money for purposes of spousal support calculation." Chloe recognized what was happening. Franco had become an asset to her professional capability, not because she required rescue, but because his particular expertise supplemented her legal strategy. The power dynamic had inverted completely from its initial configuration. She wasn't dependent. She was leveraging. Derek's criminal case proceeded through the court system with the velocity of comprehensive documentation. In January, nearly 5 months after his arrest, sentencing occurred. 12 months of incarceration. 3 years of probation. Restraining order made permanent. The judge, a woman approximately 70, who'd clearly heard variations of Derek's narrative before, expressed explicit skepticism regarding his characterization of events. The evidence presented suggests systematic harassment conducted with apparent disregard for legal constraint, the judge stated in her written decision. The defendant's narrative regarding concern for the complainant, conflicts with behavioral patterns, indicating obsessive surveillance, and repeated violation of court orders. Chloe watched the court proceedings from the observation section, Diane seated beside her. Derek's father attended, but made no attempt to approach the bench. Even institutional protection had limits when documentation was this comprehensive. When Derek was led from the courtroom in restraints, he didn't attempt to make eye contact with Chloe. That small failure of connection felt like genuine closure. He wasn't worth her psychological investment anymore. He'd become a legal matter that had concluded successfully. That was all he would ever be. Her mother's condition had stabilized into a state that suggested years remaining rather than months. Margaret Richardson occupied a private room at the care facility and had begun to recognize her daughter with consistency, even if temporal details remained fluid. During one visit in February, Margaret asked directly, Are you happy? The question was so fundamental, so divorced from the usual navigation of dementia's confusion, that Chloe needed a moment to formulate an honest answer. Yes, Chloe said finally. I'm happier than I've been in years. Because of someone, her mother pressed, with surprising lucidity. Because of myself, Chloe responded. Someone else is part of it, but not the foundation of it. Margaret seemed satisfied with that distinction. The clarity retreated, and she began discussing events from 1987 as though they were current. But the moment of genuine maternal connection had registered before cognitive dissolution returned. By March, the first genuine kiss between Franco and Chloe occurred not in some intentional moment orchestrated for intimacy, but during a routine Monday consulting session. She was reviewing restaurant supply contracts. He was standing beside her, explaining margin structures with the precision of someone who'd spent decades understanding financial architecture. He shifted his position slightly. She looked up, and the proximity suddenly contained intention. The kiss was brief, professional in its restraint, but it acknowledged something that had been developing beneath the structural frameworks they'd maintained. I'm not good at this, Franco said when they separated. Relationships that aren't transactional. Neither am I, Chloe replied. But we're learning together. That's different from either of us attempting to navigate it alone with someone who doesn't understand the damage we're carrying. Lucia had begun asking about Chloe's relationship status with increasing directness. When are you going to stop pretending this is only business? She demanded during one evening, when Chloe assisted in kitchen preparation. When it stops being ambiguous, Chloe responded. It stopped being ambiguous months ago. You're just refusing to articulate it. Marco remained present in Chloe's professional ecosystem as well. He'd begun providing security coordination when she worked late at the restaurant. Not obvious, not intrusive, just the subtle architectural presence of someone ensuring her safety during late evening hours in a building that contained far more complexity than surface appearances suggested. By late March, Chloe had achieved something she hadn't anticipated during those first desperate weeks at Stellaare. She'd become genuinely autonomous. Her career trajectory was accelerating. Her relationship with her mother had recalibrated. Her consulting work was generating income and professional satisfaction simultaneously, and her connection to Franco existed within this framework of independence, rather than disrupting it. I think I'm ready to move towards something that isn't structured around consulting agreements, Chloe said during their Thursday meeting in early April. Franco closed the contract he'd been reviewing. What would that look like? I don't know yet. But whatever it is, I want it to be based on choosing each other repeatedly rather than falling into habitual patterns. Franco nodded slowly, absorbing the proposition. Then we take time. We establish something that actually contains depth rather than just proximity. The consulting relationship would continue. The professional framework would remain, but alongside it, something newer was beginning to form. Not dependent. Not possessive. Just two people who'd survived sufficient damage to recognize the value of genuine honesty when they encountered it. The parking garage at Richardson & Associates was dimly lit at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening in mid-April. Chloe had stayed late reviewing documents for a custody case involving a woman seeking protection from an ex-spouse with resources that exceeded the average. The case had begun to consume her thoughts in ways that both satisfied her professionally and exhausted her emotionally. She'd texted Franco that she'd be late. He'd responded with a single word, understood. The underground parking structure was nearly empty. Her vehicle sat in its reserved spot, third level. She'd walked these corridors hundreds of times without incident. There was no reason to suspect this evening would differ from any other. No heightened awareness, no instinctive caution. Just the standard navigation of professional obligation transitioning into personal time. The van appeared from behind the structural column when she was approximately 40 feet from her car. Not threatening in its initial approach, just present. The side door slid open, and 3 individuals emerged. They moved with practiced coordination, suggesting this was neither impulsive nor amateur execution. One took her arm. Another positioned himself behind her. The third stood forward, blocking potential escape routes. Ms. Richardson, the lead individual said. His accent suggested Eastern European origin, though Chloe's cognitive processing was beginning to fragment under adrenaline surge. You're coming with us. The response was immediate refusal. She attempted to pull backward, to create distance, but the grip on her arm was neither casual nor negotiable. She considered screaming. The parking garage would amplify sound. But these individuals moved with the confidence of people who'd conducted similar operations before. Screaming would create urgency, but not salvation. She was placed in the van. The door closed. The vehicle began moving before her mind had fully registered the transition from independent agency to captivity. When Franco received the notification that Chloe had not arrived home by 9:15 p.m. and was not responding to telephone contact, his response was immediate and institutional. He called Thomas Wells. He called Marco. He initiated protocols that suggested this was not his first experience managing crisis of this magnitude. Esposito was already dead by this point. Chloe didn't know this yet. She didn't know that the territorial dispute that Franco had navigated with tactical precision for years had reached its terminal velocity. Esposito's alliance with cartel interests had been tactical miscalculation. He'd assumed that American territorial hierarchy and Mexican cartel operations could coexist in parallel. He was wrong. The cartel had decided that Esposito represented both vulnerability and liability. But before his elimination, before his organization dissolved into territorial chaos, cartel operatives had already been tasked with a specific objective: leverage, insurance, a mechanism to ensure Franco's cooperation with emerging territorial arrangements. The location was a warehouse in the industrial district. Chloe was placed in a room that contained a single chair, adequate lighting, and nothing else. She was not harmed. Not immediately. Not in ways that would destroy her value as leverage. She was simply removed from context and placed in the architectural absence of security. A man entered approximately 2 hours after her arrival. He was perhaps 50, with the bearing of someone accustomed to exercising authority through minimal gesture. He placed a telephone on the concrete floor and left without speaking. The telephone contained a single contact. Franco. "Your woman is safe," a voice said when she hesitantly pressed the number. "For now. Her continued safety is dependent on your cooperation regarding territories and operational restructuring." Franco listened to the demands. Specific geographic concessions, specific operational modifications, specific acknowledgement of new hierarchical arrangement. The cost was approximately 70% of his current territorial holdings and operational capacity. Franco's response, according to what Chloe would later learn, took approximately 40 seconds to formulate. "No," he said. What happened next occurred with the velocity of institutional response. Franco activated networks that Chloe didn't know existed. Not criminals in the conventional sense. Former military, intelligence operatives, individuals with specific skill sets calibrated for extraction and tactical operation. Within 4 hours, he had mobilized 43 individuals across the city with detailed targeting information. The warehouse was surrounded by 11:47 p.m. By 2:34 a.m., Franco had his answer. Chloe was on the second floor in a secured room. 4 operatives present. No immediate evidence of harm. The rescue operation was conducted with the efficiency of procedure rather than heroics. Tactical breach. Neutralization of opposition. Extraction. Medical evaluation confirming her physical safety. The entire operation consumed approximately 19 minutes. Chloe was removed from the warehouse and transported to a private medical facility, where she underwent comprehensive evaluation. She was confirmed unharmed. Psychological shock was evident. Physical injuries were confined to defensive bruising on her arms and ligature marks on her wrists where she'd been secured. Franco appeared at the medical facility at 5:17 a.m. He stood in the doorway of her room without entering, observing her for what seemed to extend beyond normal perceptual limits. His expression contained something that looked like devastation, carefully compressed into professional neutrality. "I'm bringing you home," Franco said finally. But he didn't. Not to his own location. Instead, he transported her to the apartment she'd rented during her months of independence. He placed her in her own bed. He left a security detail outside her door. He departed without remaining. For 3 days, Franco didn't contact her. The absence created its own form of trauma. Chloe understood what was happening. He was frightened. Not of external threat. Of himself. Of the patterns that his protective impulse might generate. Of repeating the infrastructure of control that she'd explicitly rejected. She called him on the 4th day. "I know why you're avoiding me," Chloe said when he answered. "You're terrified that you've become the same kind of threat as Derek. Haven't I?" Franco's voice carried exhaustion that suggested he hadn't slept since her extraction. "No. Derek's violence was about control and possession. Your violence was about rescue. The intention was fundamentally different. The outcome was the same. I removed your agency. You removed me from immediate danger, using whatever tools were available to you. That's not the same as systematically undermining my autonomy." Franco remained silent. "I saw what you had to do," Chloe continued. "I saw the networks you activated. I saw how many people moved because you commanded it. I understand now exactly who you are and what you're capable of. And I'm choosing to be here anyway. That's the difference between choice and coercion." Franco appeared at her apartment that evening. He didn't touch her. He simply existed in proximity while she processed what had occurred and what it meant for their future configuration. The cartel's demand had been refused. Esposito had been eliminated by his own allies. The territorial reorganization that had been threatened never materialized. Instead, Franco had solidified his position through demonstration of capacity for violence that exceeded what anyone had anticipated. The message was clear. Franco Grimaldi was not someone whose woman could be kidnapped without consequences that extended beyond conventional calculation. That message had cost him significant capital and favors. It had also definitively answered a question about what he valued. It wasn't territory or profit. It was her. Chloe understood this with clarity that cut through all remaining uncertainty about the nature of their connection. Recovery from trauma follows its own timeline, indifferent to conventional expectation. 2 months passed before Chloe could sleep through the night without waking in states of fractured consciousness. 2 months before the apartment didn't feel like a holding pattern. 2 months before she recognized that Franco's deliberate distance, maintained through those weeks of her rebuilding, was its own form of respect. She initiated contact on a Thursday afternoon in June. Not through Francesco's professional channels, directly. She appeared at Stellaare during afternoon service, moving through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Franco was in the back office when she found him. He looked up from accounting documents with an expression that contained multiple conflicting elements. Relief, apprehension, something that might have been fear. "I've been thinking about what you said," Chloe began without preamble, "about being frightened of healthy relationships. Chloe, I'm not finished." She closed the office door behind her. "You were afraid that your rescue of me would replicate the pattern of control, that your capacity for violence would become justification for possession. I understand that fear, because I have it too. I'm terrified that I'm damaged enough to accept something unhealthy and rationalize it as growth. I'm terrified that my judgment is compromised by trauma." Franco remained motionless. "But avoiding each other because we're both afraid doesn't resolve the fear," Chloe continued. "It just extends it. What resolves fear is actually choosing each other repeatedly, while maintaining awareness of our capacity to cause harm. That's terrifying," Franco said. "Yes, but it's also the only pathway to something genuine." Franco stood from his desk and moved toward her. He didn't attempt to touch her, just positioned himself in her space with the careful deliberation of someone asking permission through proximity. "I love you," he said. The words seemed to cost him something. "I have since the moment you stopped running long enough to recognize I wasn't Derek." Chloe felt something in her chest recalibrate. Not metaphorically, physically. The sensation of defensive structures recognizing they were no longer necessary. "I love you too," she responded, "but I need something from you." "Anything. Don't promise me anything. Don't tell me you'll change or that this will be easy. Just promise me you'll be honest about what you are and what this costs." Franco's expression shifted into something that resembled genuine relief. "I can do that." What emerged over the subsequent months wasn't dramatic transformation. It was gradual reconfiguration. Franco began the process of transitioning his operations toward legitimate infrastructure. Not abandonment of criminal enterprise, but systematic conversion of revenue streams into business models that could withstand scrutiny. Chloe's legal expertise became central to this process. 5 years was the proposed timeline. 5 years to achieve operational legitimacy, comprehensive enough that Franco could exist within institutional frameworks, rather than perpetually outside them. Lucia continued her role as kitchen matriarch, observing the recalibration of Franco and Chloe's relationship with the satisfaction of someone who understood that genuine connection required both parties to maintain agency. Marco remained present as security infrastructure, but increasingly visible in social contexts rather than operational ones. Diane Foster became a regular presence at Stellaare, consulting on cases while gradually building professional relationship with Franco that existed independent of Chloe's mediation. Derek's sentence proceeded as anticipated. 12 months in federal custody. Release in early 2026 with 3 years probation and permanent restraining order. He would disappear from Chloe's narrative entirely. Not through violent erasure, but through institutional consequence of his own behavior. The legal system had processed him. He was now simply an archived event, rather than an active threat. Margaret Richardson's dementia progressed at its own trajectory. Some days brought lucidity. Other days brought confusion regarding temporal context. But the fundamental relationship between mother and daughter had shifted from obligation to genuine connection. Chloe visited every Sunday. They sat together. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they existed in companionable silence. That distinction mattered. In August, Chloe retrieved her camera. The Pentax K1000 that had lived untouched for 3 years, abandoned when Derek convinced her it was childish. She purchased film. She began documenting the spaces she inhabited. Stellaare's kitchen, her office at Richardson and Associates, the residential care facility where her mother lived. The photographs were technically imperfect, emotionally precise. Light-finding angles through architectural imperfection. Humans existing in contexts that revealed their actual selves rather than performed versions. Franco observed this process without commentary. One evening, he positioned himself behind her while she photographed Lucia preparing sauce in the restaurant kitchen. Chloe didn't notice his presence or his observation. She was completely engaged in capturing the precise moment when natural light intersected with the chef's expression of absolute focus. When she finally became aware that Franco stood behind her, she turned to find him holding his own camera. A professional-grade device, expensive enough to suggest someone had conducted research regarding specific specifications. "I've been photographing you," Franco said simply. "When you're unaware, when you're completely yourself." He showed her the images. They were technically flawless in ways hers were not, but they contained something that transcended technical precision. They contained the evidence of someone witnessing another person's existence with absolute attention. In each photograph, she appeared real, not posed, not defended, simply alive in the moment. "I want to show these," Franco said, publicly, but not without your permission. Chloe understood what he was offering. Not possession disguised as documentation. Not surveillance. Just the evidence that he saw her completely and valued what he saw. "Yes," she said. The exhibition opened in October at a small gallery in the West Loop. 40 photographs arranged in sequence. The architectural journey of 2 people rebuilding connection after encountering each other during trauma. The images didn't tell their story literally. They told it through implication, through light, through the specific quality of attention that emerged when 2 people stopped defending and started witnessing. The opening night attendance included legal colleagues, restaurant staff, and institutional figures who rarely encountered Franco outside of contextual necessity. Diane Foster brought a journalist colleague. Lucia brought family members she'd kept separate from Stellaare for years. Marco stood by the entrance, ostensibly providing security, primarily existing as visible endorsement. Margaret Richardson attended, brought to the gallery by the care facility's activities coordinator. She moved through the space with confusion regarding the chronology of images, but clear recognition of the fundamental emotional narrative. She took Chloe's hand and said, "This is what love looks like when both people are brave enough to stop pretending." The statement contained enough clarity that Chloe recognized it emerged from one of Margaret's lucid periods. She squeezed her mother's hand in acknowledgement. Franco and Chloe stood together at the exhibition's center, not touching, but present in unified acknowledgement of what the photographs represented. Not conclusion, not resolution, Just recognition that they had survived sufficient damage to understand what genuine connection required. "What happens now?" Chloe asked. "We keep choosing this," Franco responded. "Every day, with full awareness of what we are and what we're capable of." That was all there was. Not marriage proposal, not institutional commitment, just the agreement to maintain the choice repeatedly, consciously, with complete honesty about the potential consequences. That was everything.